We have one more session left today before we break for happy hour, get everyone a chance to chat and mingle. So to wrap things up today, really excited for a quick sit-down chat between Jesse and Mike Krieger. Mike is the Chief Product Officer of Anthropic, and before that, the co-founder of Instagram. So really interesting conversation upcoming about the future of AI. Please join me in welcoming Jesse and Mike to the stage.
Awesome. Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
So for those who don't know, Mike was one of the co-founders of Instagram. Currently, he leads product at Anthropic. And so maybe we start there. I think it's obviously a very cool and exciting journey that you've been on. With your product background, and especially building consumer apps, how has that been applied / kind of merged into your world today, which is, Frontier AI Research Lab?
Yeah, I think there's like two challenges that the Instagram sort of experience directly led me to on the Anthropic side. The first one is trying to make something that's emerging more understandable. I mean, we take camera phones for granted now. We don't even call them camera phones, they're just phones. But the idea of sort of mobile interfaces and that being the primary way we might interact with something was new when we were building Instagram for the first time. And similarly, you're seeing this paradigm shift where people are getting used to the idea of interacting with AI and all sorts of form factors, whether that's voice or text. And so understanding, meeting people where they are, but then also being really sort of experimental on that edge of the capabilities, because the same UI paradigms that worked for sort of classic web apps are not going to work on mobile. The same non-Gen AI, sort of like pre-Gen AI interfaces also start breaking down as well. So that's the first piece as well. The second one is actually maybe a more surprising one, which is as Instagram grew, we also became a platform for businesses to build themselves on Instagram. And so similarly, I think one of the things that I was really excited about coming into Anthropic is that, sure, we have our first-party products, and we're going to work really hard to make those understandable and user-friendly, et cetera, but it's also a platform to power other companies like Decagon, like others, and that I think is a very, for me, it was very exciting because my in-between chapter between Instagram and then starting a second company I did some investing, and I liked getting to see a lot of companies. I liked feeling like my day was not just a single product, but I missed building. So this is kind of the best of both worlds.
Awesome. And so I guess transitioning that into, which is kind of the theme of today and also what's talked about a lot now is how do enterprises get ROI from these models, right? And there's a lot of debate now of, okay, there's some pilots, some use cases that work, some use cases that don't work as much yet. What is your view on kind of what separates, use cases that are getting a ton of traction in the market and others that maybe have struggled?
Yeah, I think the art and science of AI deployment, as I'm sure many of you are experiencing as you roll it out within your own companies, is a phrase that I take no credit for, but I heard internally and I love, which is there's two ways of timing an exponential: too early and too late. It's really hard, right, as these capabilities are advancing. And too early as you're building products and you end up in that sort of trough of disillusionment from people who've rolled it out internally where you've overpromised. And I think that some of the products that were earlier to market really did this, where, great, you're just going to hit a button and all of your work is going to be totally automated, and people try it and it's like, well, it made something. I'm not sure I'm ever going to do that again. Or products that push too far or too quickly on the autonomy or delegation front before the actual quality is there, right? So that's where the capabilities are not quite there yet. But you don't want to be too late and feel like you're left behind, and other companies have adopted and either accelerated their own product efforts or built out some competitive moat. So for us, the most successful deployments often start by having champions inside these enterprises that are really just constantly playing with these capabilities. So I was just giving a talk last week with this very large bank, and they're fortunate to have sort of leadership that are day in, day out just playing with these models and trying out the capabilities and giving us feedback. And it's this probably reflects more poorly on us than it reflects well on them. We'll sometimes be they'll report brokenness in features that we didn't even notice ourselves first, which is also on one side we got to improve our auto detection, but also just shows that they're really out there trying these different pieces. And what's interesting there is that then when it leads to some deployment, whether it's rolling out sort of internal productivity tool, rolling out some customer-facing feature, it's not grounded in this sort of mythical AI is going to solve every problem, but more around, yeah, I tried it. It's good. It's really good for these pieces. We're going to put it in in production. I love the sort of previous kind of conversation around like starting, with a ambitious but still scoped use case, and then building up from there, and then having really, really strong evaluations around how are we doing? Is this actually working? Can we scale this up? And then are we going to build there? And then what we found is within enterprises is that once successful use cases start unlocking others, because other product teams will see a good deployment and say, oh, how did you do that? We also find with enterprises, the first several months are just getting through contracting and getting comfortable with that as well. So if you can land that initial use case, often that second, third, fourth one is much easier if now it's available for a product team to deploy.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I guess speaking of the use cases, generally what we're seeing in the industry is that there's been two sort of big horizontal use cases that have gotten a lot of traction. One, of course, is in customer service, and the other is code gen. And I know you had some very interesting thoughts on why it is and the sort of similarities between those use cases of why they've been successful. And code gen is, for example, Claude Code or the Cursors of the world, Cognition. There's a lot of companies that are having success, helping engineers code. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that of why you think those two use cases have been successful and what could be applied potentially to the next big use cases.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like if you talk to customers of our models, like the two things that they often say the models are really good at. One is coding or just using tools in general, and the other one is having a really good voice and being very friendly. And so you wouldn't expect those two to necessarily emerge from the same model, but it's come from kind of the longer arc of research at Anthropic, which is we want to build powerful, intelligent AI. We want to do it safely and responsibly. And we think that the critical path to doing that is models that can do really two things really well. One is sort of plan and then work on task for longer and longer, which fits in really well to the code gen, but actually fits in really well to a lot of customer service use cases where you don't just want a single answer. Sure, a few years ago we could have done some retrieval off of an internal knowledge base and answered a simple question. What you really want is what we saw in the demos today, where it's understanding the context, it's able to retrieve data, it's able to then actually take actions, really ship a replacement. All of that actually involves acting agentically. And then the second one is models that can interact with humans over time, because we think a lot of interactions that are going to be important on the way to powerful AI are going to involve collaboration with humans. And so those two aspects have been two pillars of our research, right? This idea of long horizon tasks on one hand, and then this idea of Claude having a character. And it's not a single character, because of course each customer is going to steer it in a further way, but having fundamentally an empathetic voice that you actually want to interact with, that doesn't feel super robotic. And so those have been two use cases that we've seen customer traction. We saw customer service actually take off even before code gen in the initial phase, but I actually think there's more in common to those two use cases than you might initially think as well. And then as we think about what are the agents that we are building even inside Anthropic for solving problems that are even outside of code. So we deployed one for our legal team to help with their redlining. We deployed one for our security team to do intake of all our product teams that have new product ideas before they even hit a security engineer. They're actually all using the same kind of tool using agentic loop, and they might actually write code under the hood, but the person on the other end doesn't know that that's the case. It's just they're just trying to solve a problem, and Claude's solving that problem for them.
Makes sense. And I think, so you mentioned that as a lab, you've been kind of developing some of your own applications. I'm curious long term, how do you think this place pans out, right? Because of course, a lot of your team is, they're hardcore training the models, making sure they get better. You also have parts of the team building out applications like Claude Code and maybe eventually further applications. What do you think will be the way that frontier labs end up working with application companies like a Decagon, and how will that evolve?
Yeah, I describe it as an L-shaped platform, and it really, the breadth of the platform that we want to power is everything from companies like Decagon to companies in the life sciences, in healthcare, and financial services, really broad use cases where there's a lot of really specialized knowledge about how to go to market, tools to be built on top, sort of integration into customers, that entire relationship that you all have with your customers, that's differentiated and unique for all those companies. And then we'll choose to build some verticals, usually when it's something that we know a lot about, so we know a lot about code, and that is useful, or places that will teach us a lot about some particular vertical. So the feedback we've gotten, for example, having Claude Code in market, directly inform the next model releases and lets us improve on that as well. The feedback we get from doing some of the work that we've been doing on more of like the knowledge worker horizontal with Cloud for Work has been really helpful in training the model to be better and better at producing PowerPoint documents, for example. So that's where we choose to build vertically. Now connecting back to the Instagram experience, we were really focused on just like focused set of features that we wanted to do extremely well versus having a platform that did everything not as well. And I'm applying the same philosophy to what we choose to build here. We're not going to do 500 things. We're going to do a few things, but try to go deep on them.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then you mentioned that there's kind of this almost like competitive differentiation element that goes into that. Now in the AI space, there's so many companies building all sorts of different things, both in applications, but also with AI labs. A lot of people training foundational models. How do you view competitive differentiation in the context of an AI lab, with compared to other labs or new research labs that are popping up, trying to train their own models?
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects of it. I mean, there's the model, of course, and we could talk about that for a bit. Then there's the platform that you build around the model, and then there's sort of the relationship you have with the companies that are building on your platform. And I'll maybe go in reverse order, because I think the relationships are really important. Like when I came into Anthropic, just like about a year and a half ago, it was like not obvious that we were going to compete with the other frontier labs. Like we had less funding, a much smaller team. Claude 3 had just come out. And my hypothesis coming in, and I think it was shared by a lot of people at the company, is like we can just lean in and it doesn't sound funny, but just like care more and just like really lean into every customer that we work with and try to just make sure that they're successful. And you'll see it in like how much, I try to join as much of the customer shared Slack channels as I can. It's a little noisy, but it's like interesting. But like whenever customers are like, hey, we're gearing up for a big launch, like we need to unlock this capacity, or the model's like working well in this case, but it's not working well, like just trying to get people over the line so that their ultimate success actually is partnered with ours. So that's a big piece. Then there's the platform around the model as well, which like the first version of a lot of these APIs was, all right, you give us your prompts, we'll give you an answer, and that's it. And that's fine for getting off the ground, but over time, there's much more sort of complex use cases that people are building on top of the platform, right? You might want memory. You might want the sort of multi-turn, like more agentic use cases. You might want us to help improve prompts over time for you in a background way based on everything that we've learned. So we're really trying to build more than just the models as the platforms over there. And then in terms of differentiating on the model, I wish I could say that labs are going to find their like unique secret sauce that nobody else is going to replicate, but it's definitely much more of like you can't stop running. We describe it internally as a marathon of sprints. It definitely feels that way, probably for the research team even more than any other team in there. But it's also what we signed up for, and it's like also this like very exciting moment in time where we're all sort of in our own way. I think each lab has its own sort of taste and its own approach to building things. It's not to say that we're building the same models, but it's also like it's a nonstop sort of competition to see who can continue to push the frontier forward. And I think the difference with Anthropic is we're trying to do that, but also push forward the notion of like what it means to build these models safely and show that you can do both. Like these aren't in tension with each other.
Yeah, our team definitely resonates with that. I mean, we think about the same things, right? Like at the granular level, we're working with customers, and so every day is like you got to make sure those problems are solved, and we're really making them happy. But in the long term, it's like very obvious that this space is a large market. It's a very obvious use case. And so it does feel like a kind of like a constant sprint of like, okay, there's always more to build. You got to be the fastest there. So yeah, I think that's true for the applications as well. Maybe shifting gears a little bit. So one of the big themes with AI is what will happen with the sort of the future of work for humans, right? And there are a lot of jobs now that AI can do fairly well. And so what will happen to those human jobs? What do you view as the role of the human worker now that AI is getting more and more productive, and how do you think that will change over time?
Yeah, and I think this will definitely evolve. But one of the things that we think a lot about is like what is like the comparative advantage for humans. I think one really strong pillar is like trust building and relationships, where we have a growing sales team. We do a lot of sales relationships, and even as we're bringing Claude into different parts of the sales process, whether it's helping for prospecting leads or even composing like initial reach outs or whatever these different pieces are, that is a helpful accelerant for good sales folks, but it's not the thing that is going to like really close a sale or really make a long-term relationship happen, right? It's much more around, have you built that trust? Have you deeply understood their problems? Like there's a human at the other end of the line, at least for the next few years there is, right? And so how do you make sure that piece remains really, really human? So that's one side of it as well. When I think about our own product team, we use Claude in a bunch of ways in terms of kind of honing our thinking, understanding user feedback at scale, doing so in like a privacy-preserving way. But none of the models are at the point where they are sort of creating novel ideas or like synthesizing data in a way that like sparks up brand new things. So there's this back and forth where I'll have a lot of our product team, be deep in user problems, like create new ideas, and then the models are great for vetting those or like going and doing research and saying, does that exist already? And like, let's go off and like, and kind of pressure test those ideas. And so we still see it very much as this back and forth. And so I think as the model capabilities improve across the board, like that comparative advantage might change over time. You might see more of the bifurcation that you were seeing in the case of the Chime sort of support agents, where you're seeing like, all right, these are more complex problems that are getting sort of brought in there, right? And so I think you'll see bifurcation. I think you'll continue to see this comparative advantage. But I think also just being real, like that's not a fixed point in time. It's not to say that that is exactly going to be the same 3 years from now. And so a lot of what we're trying to do from a company perspective is get folks really on that sort of journey around experimenting with AI so that they're not caught off guard, or so they can continue to find like, all right, well, the models seem to be getting better in this dimension. I'm going to keep working on this side of things. Or the models are getting better in this way, and so I might shift my role to being more about managing like a series of Claudes doing this work rather than just sort of giving a single Claude a back and forth instruction.
Got it. So yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why we use Anthropic models, and as you kind of think about enterprises and what enterprises need, a big thing that always comes up is security and trust and safety. And I think Anthropic's done a very good job just building up a brand of, hey, we're enterprise friendly, we can be deployed in your VPC and things like that. Is that something you think a lot about when developing the models, and what is kind of top of mind from a trust, safety, security standpoint when you're actually building out these new developments?
Yeah, I mean, even from the beginning, and certainly like it's ramped up even more in the last year and a half. Like we've taken much more of like a B2B enterprise view on things. Just funny for me coming from like a very consumer world, but I wanted to be also doing something that didn't feel exactly like the thing I was doing before. I think there's a few pillars that matter there. Like one is the partners we've chosen in terms of like being available in AWS, being available in GCP, like meeting enterprises where they are in terms of their own relationships with these cloud providers. That's been really important. Deploying things in a way where we can't physically look at any like prompts and completions of enterprise data. That ends up being really important for a lot of these enterprise deployments. That's at the like deployment level. Then there's at the model level. And this wasn't obvious to me when I started, and now it's really clear. A lot of the work that we've been doing around making the models safe actually make them very enterprise friendly. Because you think about the way in which they dovetail, you want models that are aware of their own limitations and not going to sort of make up a bunch of stuff just because they can. You want models that like are really good at instruction following, so that like within an AOP there's certain instructions the model's not going to go off somewhere else. You want models that hallucinate as little as possible, and so we like really train our models to try to ground themselves in real data as much as possible. And then you also want models that are like really hard to jailbreak. So that's really important. Like these two things at first sound really different, right? It's really important for customer service. It's also really important for our work to mitigate like bio risk of the models, but they're actually like grounded in the same things. Like you want the models to remain really true to their instructions and not be jailbroken. And so it's been really cool to see that like it's not that, oh, we can be both enterprise friendly and try to build safe models, but actually we are enterprise friendly because we are building models in a way that is safe, and we will continue to push that as well. And we hear that all the time when we talk to customers who say like, oh yeah, great, I put the model through the paces, and the fact that it was really sort of robust against jailbreaking and honest, like actually made it the one that we wanted to deploy.
Great. So one last topic here. People love talking about AGI. So maybe along that sort of line of thinking, how would you define AGI? Both how long will it take to get there, but also what do you think are the big milestones that we haven't reached yet that will be up next on the road to AGI?
I think it's become very clear to me, and I think it's becoming clear to a lot of people, which is that this is not going to be, at least in my opinion, like this sort of like 0 to 1 where you're like, great, we got there, like we got to AGI, but much more sort of this like very, this evolution of an intelligence that is increasingly spiking in areas and still not good in others, right? And so you see this in the ability for, Claude to write and run code for hours, and you're like, okay, well that's at the level and across, multiple dimensions in a way that's like superhuman. And I've been an engineer my whole career, and I've just like seen it do these things. But at the same time, if you put Claude in a Slack channel, as we do internally, like it still has a long way to go before you're like, this sounds human, completely, because does it know when to chime in? Does it know how to synthesize, like, does it act human? Like, there's all these other places where it's still not there yet. And so I think you'll continue to see that as well, where it's superhuman in many ways, and then still makes mistakes that a human would like absolutely not make, and is grounded in that as well. And so, I don't know when you'll like be able to demarcate and be like, this is AGI, like is it like some level of errors where you're like, okay, I would trust it to be a full-time employee at my company. Maybe that's like a good barometer for it. We have a internal metric or idea, which is like the coworker Turing test, where if you put Claude behind, maybe you'll call it Slack, will it be fully, would it pass for a full coworker? And we're none of the models are there yet across the board, right? And so there's a long ways to go there. So in terms of like big areas left to do, I think maintaining memory intelligently, right? Like you still like run into the questions around like what's in the model's context? What did it remember? Does it have the ability to say, all right, I did this 3 months ago in a way that human might, and I'm going to remember the right things from that and not all of it, right? And so like managing memory over long horizons, I think that's one really big piece. Taking feedback and incorporating that in the right ways, that's another place. Knowing when to be proactive and when to chime in and when to sort of like lean back, that's another kind of major area as well. Vision and how the models see, like that's improved pretty well, but even now, one thing we like to look at is, the models can generate user interfaces. Can they also look at the UIs and say, how could this be better? And that loop is still not fully there. And then even in coding, what the models are very good at, there's still some really complex like coding use cases that they haven't quite gotten to. So these are some of the dimensions that we look at, but again, none of these are like, great, we're like one click and then we'll achieve AGI. I think you'll continue to see each generation of models continue to improve. And you look in the mirror, I don't know if you all are hikers, but sometimes when you're hiking, it's like, oh, this feels steep, but it doesn't feel like we're going that far. And then like you kind of pause for a second. If you look downhill, you're like, wow, we've come a really, really long way. Like it was just February that we launched Claude Code for the first time, and like did Claude 3.7, and like we're only in September, and the models feel very, very different. I think you'll be able to look back 5-6 months ago and from now and have a similar experience, and whether that'll feel like AGI, it probably will not in some ways and really far in others still.
Yeah, super interesting. Well, thank you so much for coming, Mike, and let's give Mike a huge round of applause.
Yeah, thanks for having me.